Being Human with Algorithms today with Hans Pongratz. Pleasure having you here today. So could you briefly introduce yourself to our audience?
Thanks for having me here, Mark Oliver. My name is Hans Pongratz. I'm Senior Vice President and Chief Information Officer of the Technical University of Munich. I'm computer scientist, did my PhD some years ago for the IT architecture for the digital university. And we are here fostering lots of issues on the one hand, on the other hand, the chances of the digital transformation.
Cool. And I also know that you are also involved in teaching activities, also from the president side of the MOOCs and so on. And so this is definitely also something where the digital transformation is happening today. So what would you say, how do you perceive this digital transformation? So personally and also like in your workplace, so as a person, as vice president there, so you probably get to talk to lots of interesting people there. So what would you say are the most important or most obvious things where this digital transformation appears to you?
First of all, it's a hype topic, to be very frank. We're talking, on the one hand, on a transition phase, because lots of people are now using digital tools, so we don't have the analog typewriter anymore. We have computer systems. But what does it mean? Does it already mean that you have your PDF formula, you print it out, you fill it out, you sign it, and the other one scans it in? Or do you have a really full digital process? And that's always the question, and how the people are working with it. And we at the Technical University, we have different pillars. So on the one hand, the pillar for sure is research. How is research affected, for example? And there are different speeds for sure, because in the different subjects, all the people are using digital technologies on a different level. But it's good, it's okay, because you're within an international community and you have to look within your community what their state of the art, and then you have to translate it to your home university. The next pillar would be teaching. And for sure teaching, there's lots of options. You already pointed out, we have massive open online courses. In short, Munich open online courses. That's a good one.
Nice.
But the key thing is, I started my career at TUM 2005 in the field of e-learning.
Yeah.
In former times we called it e-learning, and then it was technically enhanced learning. We have massive open, whatever. So there are lots of buzzwords around, but what does it mean? And we as a really renowned university with great faculty, with great rooms, with labs, with stuff like that, we have to define what does it mean as on-site university to use the digital tools. Does it mean, for example, that we have lecture recording? But is it still wise to record 90 minutes of a lecture? Because normally we have it from the MOOCs, and that from my point of view, the tipping point that we get lots of information, we can learn a lot of things, and we have analysis of the MOOCs that 5 years ago the people watched videos for about 12 minutes, 40 minutes, whatever. Now they're at 8 minutes. Okay, I know after 8 minutes lots of students within a MOOC, the online course, click away and do something else. What does it mean for 90 minutes lecture recording? And so you have translated and you have to discuss it, and perhaps you have to reshape your on-site courses, and then you can reuse them on a digital level. And that would be smart, and we're working on approaches like that. And the third pillar would be all the administration. And there's lots or tons of stuff to do. And the bad thing is, or the I would say the difficult part is that we are within a federated system. We are public state university within the Free State of Bavaria, and so we have federal laws and we have Bavarian laws, and we are within the European Union, we have their EU laws, and we are within the Bologna system. And lots of people don't know that there are as many as double so many countries joined the Bologna approach, the Bologna Declaration, and are not, and so only half of them are member of the EU. And we have different laws there too. And we're discussing on different levels with more than 40 players around how to shape, for example, a transcript of record, or how to make a module handbook and stuff like that. And on the other hand, you know what's teaching is, and you're standing in class how does module description affect your teaching? And we have to translate it there. You have to understand, it's important for the students to know it, because later on, if they want to join another university or stuff like that, then they need it somehow. But right now, in the moment, in the lecture hall, they don't need it at all. And so that's something that we have really to work on. But there are lots of benefits within the digital transformation, within the administration. And I think we have to talk with it. And though it's great that you have your talk here in the interviews, that we should look at different levels from different perspectives on the topic.
So that's where already very many and important points. So maybe coming to the teaching, so there a nice anecdote is like one of my teachers, when I was studying myself, he said like his kids would never be able to stand a lecture because they're used to a commercial break after 20 minutes of watching TV. And so would you say that the attention span is going down, or would you say that it's just different learning and you have more offers? So just maybe to give a little bit more background. So my personal impression as a teacher here is that over the time the students expect more and more from the lectures. So they before like it was not even so long, like for instance before like 10 years ago maybe, so it was like you had the professor, it was the authority, and then you had the students and you feel like talking to the professor. And today it's much different. Today it's like, okay, your lecture was not interactive enough, so I'm bored, so I will not come again, or I will even complain about that. And so can you elaborate a little bit more in that direction? So would you say there's a change in the there's a massive change in this teaching, so in the receivers, so in the students and also in the senders, so that they have to adapt to it? Or would you say like it's a normal evolution? So is it more revolution or evolution from your point of view?
Actually, as computer scientist, I think always it's an evolution, because there are logical steps, and you need, for example, bandwidth to transport lots of video material and stuff like that. So it's always a logical consequence. But we're talking here about people from all different directions, and we have it of all ages. For example, our professors are a huge variety of very smart people, and we have to address that, and we have to talk with them and convince them just to try out what are the possibilities of the digital tools somehow. But we can't say that they are better than the classical way, because right now we're meeting here in person. We could do it even virtually too. We could make a hangout or stuff like that, you know what I mean? But it's something different, because we meet, we have a little chat before, later we have the social aspect within. And I think if you look back to your own classes you had, to your own professors or school teachers and stuff like that, it's not always the one with the best jokes you remember. Sometimes you remember the one who did the toughest teaching load, or who really challenged you. And I think that will be quite interesting. And it's something like, it's always the question, do we have to do edutainment, or do we have to do something like education and shape something like a way of thinking? And I think that's the difference. So it's not only apply something, but we have, as a university, we have to really to shape your mind, a kind of thinking in the special field you're studying. And so you have always to look what are the best tools. Right now I have a seminar for digital transformation in higher education, and it's quite interesting because I said, okay, should we do a hangout? And some of the students in the room were skeptical about that. But hey, we're talking about digitalization, let's try it out, and then we can say it's good or it's not good. And if it doesn't work out, hey, okay, next tool. But I think we have to really try it out and look where are the benefits. And I think back to the root question, it was, I think in class you have always to look how to address your auditorium. And you don't need something digital for it. I remember back as our student here, Professor Zenger, he did something like concrete mathematics and fault tolerant and stuff like that. And as the auditorium was sleeping again, he placed a coin, it was I think 5 D-Mark in former times, and he said, okay, who now knows the correct answer gets money. And everyone was awake, money, stuff like that. And there are easy tools around. I think if you're a good teacher, then you have your tools, and you can only try to get perhaps more back, or I would call it, in German it was Rückkanal, the information back from your auditorium it's on the digital channel, and that's something new. In former times with TV and so on, you had only the one side you could use the channel, a one-way ticket somehow. And now you have something like a two-way ticket, because you can get information about the usage of your system or about your information, and then you can try to work with the students together and to enhance your material, but it takes time. And that's the most valuable resource we have somehow, our lifetime. And so we have always to look, okay, what are the good concepts and fruitful, I would say, cases, how to improve on the one hand your material, on the other hand you only have a minute once on a life.
Okay, so cool. So what I especially like at what you answer is also this aspect of that it's a continuous process and you have to try it out and then do things. And so this is also what I like a lot at Technical University of Munich, because as I'm lecturing here for now 11 years, I guess, it's very good that I also get these opportunities to try out new formats and do something with it, and that there's also like a lot of support in doing that, and at the same time also lots of offers for interested people. I mean, not everybody takes it, which I find a little bit sad sometimes, because some people could really need it, but they just don't take the offer. But there's really a lot that is offered, and that's really a great thing. One aspect you said, or that came to my mind there, is also complexity. So would you say being a teacher, but also taking the administrative dimension, for instance, would you say, like, as a worker today in different fields, it's more complex through having these digital tools? Because you also mentioned already that you have lots of more information, you have the feedback channels, and so before you could just say, like, okay, I'm standing here, I'm talking, if there would be a wall, it would not matter to me because I'm just here and standing. And so today, you have lots of information, and also you have like live information. So when I think about Michael Volkmann from the TUM Pro Lehre and Didaktik, Medien and Didaktik, so he presented me early like this tools where you have the immediate feedback via the iPad, for instance, and I found it really fascinating. And at first I thought, like, okay, it will be shocking, and then I mean, I'm not using that one now, but I started through this program there being much more interactive for the students and daring to ask them questions and interacting. And so would you say that this more information and timely information could be overwhelming to people? The complexity is also something bad?
Yes, absolutely. I think that's a tough one somehow. On the one hand, it's fascinating if you're using these tools like TweetBack, Pingo, online chat and stuff like that. They are called audience response tools. And that's something like a nice example that the techniques or technology is getting ripe somehow, because in former times you had these clicker things. You had need an extra device, you had to collect them, give them the students, change batteries and stuff like that. It didn't work. It was crap. But now you have it online. Like everyone with its own smartphone can use it, and that's fine, it's good. But as you mentioned, the complexity is getting higher and higher. And we have to keep track and to try to don't lose someone because of the complexity. And the bad thing with the complexity is that it's not really transparent, and that there are lots of possibilities to fail. And that's something like you're a computer scientist, I'm one we have to work on.
And always this question also comes to my mind then, which is like, do we lose parts of the population? So what I have also in mind here is that so when you look at the people finishing at TUM, so the numbers at computer science are always rising. So I think we now have like 2,000 starters, 2,000 freshmen at the moment, and so is it necessary to go to university today to cope with the challenges that you have when you want to be successful in life? What is your opinion to that? I mean, I know it's a tough question, so I also...
It's a big one. I would say different levels. On the one hand, yes, it's completely correct that by student numbers, our department for informatics is the largest one of whole TUM. In former times, it was mechanical engineering or other ones, and that's a fact, and it's interesting. On the other hand, I think you have always to look, there are lots of programmers around the world who don't know the concepts of informatics. What's somehow very dangerous from my point of view. They don't know what an invariant is, or they don't know that you need to terminate something, or you don't know that that there's something like complexity you can calculate. And there are different formats for it. You can say, okay, this program terminates after whatever, 50 minutes, 100 minutes, whatever. And if you don't know the basis of these concepts and are just using something like a compiler or whatever IDE, then there is some danger around. And I think there we need even more people who cope with these topics. But my mother, she's a medicine or Allgemeinarzt, an Ärztin,
Yeah, doctor.
a doctor, general
yeah.
doctor,
Yeah.
and my father is too. But they're using emails, for example.
Yeah.
But I tried to tell her that's if she's compared with a postcard, you normally
Yeah.
bring a postcard to a mail station, and then it's from Munich to Hamburg, for example, and it goes on a quite direct way.
Yeah.
And the email goes on a direct way via the internet, but there are different weights on, and perhaps a direct way means the cheapest way would be from Munich to whatever, Prague, and then to Hamburg or
Yeah.
whatever. And there are different concepts around.
Yeah.
And if we would like to teach all the people who are using the internet the complexity, we need something like a driver's license.
Yeah.
For cars, we have it. I don't know
Yeah.
if we should have it or not, but
Like the Internetführerschein. That
yeah,
was
perhaps
also
there were
discussed
concepts around,
Yeah.
yeah, but actually, it's over the question: how can we get all people involved somehow?
Yeah.
How to be sure that there's an inclusive system
Yeah.
around and not an exclusive somehow?
Yeah.
Because if we're getting more and more business process on the internet or with e-government concepts and stuff
Yeah.
like that, if you really have to use it, then there could be the fear you already mentioned that we
Yeah.
close some people out, and that's the danger, yeah.
Yeah, that's also interesting in that sense that, as you know, we are also currently launching this iLab X, the Internet Masterclass, which is exactly teaching this how the internet works. So I will send you the link, then you can tell it to your mother, because it's exactly like one aim that I have with this course, to not only inform the TUM students because they can come to my course already, but to inform the general public of how does this system that they use every day, how does it work? Because I also see this internet as the backbone of the digital transformation, because only through these communication links it's possible to have the tools and systems that we have today.
On the other hand, I have challenging discussions at home. And another private example, my wife did a PhD in economics and studied something in molecular biotechnologies, and now is doing a postdoc. And she says, okay, IT is nice, but it's not of her interest. She has other hobbies, you know.
Yeah.
And it's I have to to keep care of her backups of her iPhone and stuff like that. It's my job. So it's okay, but it's a valid point. It's a fair point that not everyone is as interested for the technical stuff and internet stuff like us.
Yes.
And so we have to keep on that too, that we shape something what is usable. Something like not everyone who has a driver's license know how a car works.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's fair that they don't want to know it, because there's something like it's a garage. If it's something broken, they go there. So why not?
So this is also like an interesting point, because a good friend of mine, he's a lawyer, and he always tells me that a law is the most important science or humanity that you can have there, because this would affect the people every day and it would hold everything together. And I always tend to tell him, like, okay, but I mean, if you wouldn't have like computer technology, it would be much worse, don't you think? But he doesn't agree to that.
Yeah.
And so this is also like brings me then to the question: would you say that the school education should have also more emphasis on the computer science? I think it's getting better and better. So when I think we went to school almost at the same time, so I remember I had this Word 2.0, I guess, that was just text-based with colors, and it was that we as pupils, we had more experience about the computer technology than the teachers back then. And I think today it's very different. So today you have this expertise, but to the best of my knowledge, computer science is still not such a basic subject like German in Germany or like math, but it's still like something additional. And so would you go that far that you would say, okay, we should emphasize this more already at school, because it's a basic societal technology, I may call it right now, that people should be aware of, like they are aware of their mother language or of how numbers can be added and subtracted?
I would say something like data and internet literature should be good. That I know something like in former times, I said not everything which is in the written press it's correct, because it's just standing there, and I have to get a critical point of view with all the information I get from the internet, and I have to weight them somehow and categorize them. in Bavaria, we have now informatics in the gymnasium as a subject, and I think it's an interesting approach. Other federal states in Germany don't have it, and so it's always a question how to get it within the system. Because we have 3 kids and 2 of them in school, we had already ongoing discussion with teachers, and some of them say the kids should first learn how to read, write, and calculate without computers.
Yeah.
And that's a fair point, I would say.
Yeah.
And if you don't have the basics somehow, then you can't work on. And actually today I had a discussion with a professor here in mathematics. He said, and there are even some biological reasons, because if you use your hands, then you use your left brain half and stuff like that, and there's a more creative part. And so from his point of view, it makes sense that we're using our hands to be creative somehow. Yeah. And so we first have to research if something like typing on the computer would do the same, or if you have to write on the computer. That's now even a ripe technology already. Yeah. It's getting there. And so perhaps that would be a good point too, but we have to do research there. And back to the key question, I would say it would be good if you have more creative and game-like approaches. Something like there's the robotic parts and stuff like that, and young children have the possibilities to play around. Yeah. And we have especially focused on how to get a new, I would say, a new role model for our girls. Yeah. Because in the international context, in the US and in Asia and so on, there are lots, from my point of view, there are lots of more girls interested in technologies than in Germany. Yeah. And so we have to cope that and foster on that. And perhaps there are smart ways with different educational concepts and stuff like that. I don't know. I don't have the solution for us. But we should talk about it.
Plus it's like, what you can see here at TRM is also that there are more and more girls, which is good. I mean, they're still totally underrepresented, but the amount is growing, where probably also the girls' days and the information events are playing a certain role. And it's what is also always good and extremely important to me is that, like, when you work in teams where you have also girls in the team, like the atmosphere and the culture is totally different and definitely to the better. And so therefore it's in the interest of productivity even also to have it, if it's not only for equality there. Yeah, that's interesting.
But perhaps just to jump in, not everybody should be a programmer.
Yeah, definitely.
From my point of view. So there are enough other jobs to do.
That reminds me on the other thing I wanted to say. Like, so when I started studying computer science, I don't know how it was with you. I was like getting the brochures. It was still written. Like I get like a book there, and I got the one from Karlsruhe, and they described it very well. And I read it, and I was like, "Oh, that sounds so boring. I don't want to study that." And then I studied in Tübingen in the end because it was media informatics, or it was informatics with a minor in media science. And so I thought, "Oh well, that's the thing. I can program games. I can make videos and stuff." And then, of course, it was the same computer science as we have here, and it was great to have that because indeed, it's like. I mean, I didn't learn like programming. It was good that I could do it before. I mean, I also learned it, but just as a side thing, because the major thing was just logical abstraction and thinking and problem solving and so on. And it's also something that many people do not know. And this is also probably something that the girls don't know. So when I think about my wife, so she would have been also the perfect computer science student, but she thought, okay, it's something that is more for boys and it's complicated and I probably will fail. And so this is also like a challenge, how to raise the awareness of computer science. What is this actually? And so even though it's a little bit off topic, I still want to ask you, like, do you have like good ideas how we could raise this awareness? Because I still have the impression when I talk to people that are like, I mean, but still our age even. Like when I talk to this friend I talked about who's the lawyer, when I tell him like, computer science, he doesn't know what it is. So because, I mean, he has an idea, it has to do something with computers, but he was also the one who told me like, you're the one who can fix my Windows on my printers. And so this is not computer science. So do you have a process there? Is TUM doing something into that direction? Like making society aware of what computer science actually is? Because, I mean, the TUM is the or a leading university in Germany and also in the world, and so or also like, is it a German problem maybe? So I think you have much more background in that. Did you think about that ever?
Yes, we had lots of discussion even on the TUM Board of Management, because we need something like role models, and we need something like heroes, female heroes you could look at. And so we started last year the web series Technically Single. I don't know if you were aware or did have a chance to look at. It's even on Maxdome, on different other platforms. It's a series with I think 6 or 7 parts. Each part is 10 or 15 minutes. So you can.
And it's videos?
Videos.
Cool.
It was produced with Hochschule für Film und Fernsehen.
Yeah.
And at TUM Stammgelände.
I was reading about it, I guess.
And
but I
it's
didn't
quite
have the
funny.
chance to look at it
And
yet.
Maria Furtwängler, for example, she's playing
right.
a professor
Yeah, I was
there
reading
and stuff.
about it.
So you should
nice.
look. Actually, I got different feedback from students. Some think it's very cool. Others said, "Oh, what do you want with that?" And so, but it was a first approach. It was Klaus Diepold, former vice president and professor of electronic engineering, who's very aware with the media stuff, and he had the concept and built it up, and he did it. And so we'll see. But I think it's a great approach, and we did something.
It's a great approach. Yeah, definitely.
And so we've worked on because there is a so-called Scully effect.
What's that?
That's with CSI.
Yeah.
And former times there was the X-Files, I think it was called.
Yeah.
And there were always female main characters who did some technical stuff.
Yeah.
And so there's some research done, and they said, okay, they really attracted girls to do something in this field because they are the heroes somehow.
Yeah.
So we need more into TV because obviously if you look back in Star Trek or whatever, it was Kirk, it was Spock, and so on. It was only male people around, and so we need different people around.
Which was also genders. Like there's this. So I don't know if it's true, but it sounded reasonable at least. So when you look back in the computer science history, so at the beginning you had the girls because it was something where you had to like be concentrated and do things, and it was like, okay, the boys are not that good in math, and so they are not so suitable, and then. So the story there in this I think it was even a paper. The story there was like that it changed with the personal computers because then the boys got the computers and they had the computer games, and then they had just an advantage because they were used to the technology already, and then the girls felt like, oh no, it's nothing for me because I don't have the experience, and they were somehow expelled from it. And so that's also interesting because it's again this. You are not familiar with it, and therefore it's a good approach to approach the pupils, so to get them in again. Because
I think perhaps you need even other computer games.
Yeah.
So there are different approaches around, but stuff like that, how to attract.
Yeah.
But back to your to some question before. I don't know if the young generation, in brackets, Socrates already told it 2,000 years ago that the younger are always the bad. But right now it is something like. If they're really able to focus or not, because now if you look at computer games or even at TV series and stuff like that, you have very fast cuts.
Yes.
And if you look at the old Tatort or Stanley Kubrick film 2001, Odyssey in Weltall,
you cannot watch it actually.
You can't watch it anymore. It's so slow.
Yeah.
But actually, so we get a little bit changed too, and everything is now fast. If you look at your email inbox, I think you get thousands of emails right now in the last 5 minutes or stuff like that. Yeah. And
sadly,
we have to work on that. But on the other hand, you get short emails normally, and the long ones you stick there and let's wait and time to. And so you even are trained to don't focus anymore. Yeah. And so we should perhaps work on this too, and perhaps that could be a fourth pillar back to the main question. Something like, how is our workplace of the future? Yeah. What do we need? Do we need special contracts around? Because normally. That's a funny thing. In Bavaria, you have something at closing times. And as I was young, there was Saturday was closed, and Saturday was open till 12 o'clock, then 2 o'clock and stuff like that. Now it's open. But still on Sundays, if we would be really hardliners, we should close down the internet in Bavaria. But you don't do it. You can shop in the internet. You can do everything. I can shop at night. I can use new services, something like Amazon Prime or stuff like that. And within a board meeting at 8 o'clock in the evening and can order something that's delivered till 12 o'clock in the night. Yeah. It's fantastic from my point of view. But on the other thing, with all our labor laws and stuff like that, we have to advance them too. Because it can't be that there's an unfair competition somehow. And that's issues we have to discuss. We need something like new working models, new working hours, because, for example, Volkswagen, they're closing down their email servers after I think 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night. Yeah, I think Bosch is doing that too. I don't know if it's smart because it's something like a kind of Bevormundung. It's something like I'm saying you're not ripe enough or you're not old enough to do it on your own. But on the other hand, there are studies around that it's always tough because they're hierarchy level. You want to work, you want to show your boss that you're working still at night and stuff like that. And like so more the Japanese style. It's interesting. I think there we have to work on, because in former times you had post mails, paper mail, and you go to your mailbox and you emptied it, and perhaps the second time in some countries it was delivered on one day, but then you finished with the work.
Yeah.
And then the next day came.
Yeah.
Right now I get 24 hours I get emails.
Yeah. And this also brings us also to another interesting question, namely regulations of the internet. Because this what you described with what Volkswagen is doing, and maybe other companies do too, it's a as you say, like it's cutting the liberal rights of the employee. I mean, one would never call it like that, but the freedom of the employee to work when the employee wants to work. From what you said before, what I also very much liked, I think so. For me, from my personal perspective, it was very difficult to overcome the situation. Like, okay, when the email comes in, I have to answer it immediately. And when my boss wants something, no matter what time it is, I have to react promptly. And in order to stay healthy and not to die, once your workload is at a certain level, you somehow have to realize that. And so the other model is like, okay, yeah, the employees don't have to realize that. We prevent them from burnout or whatever by cutting that. And so yeah, it's just interesting to see. And also, so I mean, the answer or what you could say to it could go, I think, in two directions. So the one is regulation of the internet, like, okay, freedom to access to things, and the second thing, let me think what I thought. I just forgot it. The second thing is like if the literacy of this internet, so that what you described a little bit before, if it's like if it's rather this that we should give to the people, so not to protect them from the technology, but rather give them the ability to make deliberate choices for some things there.
I think there are different aspects. One aspect is that there are always coming up new channels, and we have to work with that. So for example, in former times you had the paper-based channel, then you had the fax, then you had something like more telephone, you have the cell phone, you have instant messaging, you have email, you have whatever, and you have different platforms from chat and this chat, A chat, B chat, C chat, Slack. There are thousands of tools around, and it's always interesting how groups are working with it. And after sometimes, normally there's something like they're getting rid of some tools because they see, okay, it doesn't work out. And I think we have to empower our employees and our students, our staff, everyone to say, okay, we need some baselines. And perhaps one baseline some companies have, that you have a special response time. You say, okay, for email, it should be answered in a week or whatever, or some companies have 24 hours. I think that's too narrow the time window. And on other aspects, something like instant messaging, if you're away or stuff like that. So you have to somehow cope with the pressure. And there is building up pressure, and that's quite interesting. And on the other hand, I'm dreaming of an email assistant who has some smart capabilities and answers a little bit, and pre-sorts, for example, if we are now in a meeting, perhaps only very important mails came through and other ones are sorted out, and perhaps next mails comes just in if are less than X mails within open in my inbox and stuff like that, because always I think you have to get on a higher level and try to analyze your working habits. And then you can optimize them. But normally, lots of people have so high pressure and so much stress and stuff like that they are not capable to do it. And that's an issue. And then you get burnout and stuff like that. And so we have to cope on that. On the other hand, with regulation, that's, don't blame me, but that's a funny thing. Lots of politicians think everyone has the same ethics like them and can just copy it to the internet. You know it better than me, but you have the internet, and the internet is an open network, and you can connect, and there's connect even bad states with not democratic or other states or whatever. Everyone can join, and it's an open one. And so it's hard to apply one law because we have state-based laws.
Yeah.
And there are different approaches. Even if you go to Berlin, you can buy something at night. In Munich, after 8 o'clock, it's an issue.
Yeah.
And you can't just copy it to the internet.
Yeah.
And so I think we have to work on this too, that you understand how the internet works. For sure, you could build up an own network.
Yeah.
Russia is doing it, or
Yeah.
they are thinking about it. One of our politicians in Bavaria said, "Oh, we need a Bavarian internet."
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of it, but there are different options around, and I think we have to discuss it, because right now it was a technical approach. It was something like it should be discussed, recoverable and very robust, I would say. And if we need other options, or if we need something like new intelligence within the network or stuff like that, we have to build up a new one. We could do it, but we have to define it. And right now there are so many different rules around. If you look, for example, at copyright laws, something like a German YouTube wouldn't be possible because there's no fair use.
Yeah.
But everyone is complaining why we don't have such a YouTube within the European Union, because the laws didn't allow it, and stuff like that. So it's most of the time, from my point of view, it's not a fair discussion within the media, and there we should work too on.
But plus, so I agree to that. Plus, a problem that I see is that the politicians that are deciding about these technical matters often have not enough clue about it. So when you think about these upload filters right now, for instance, so the probability that the law is now implemented in the way they might have intended it is quite low, because the formulation is already going in such a wrong direction that it will probably end up in censorship. And this is like this is like a key problem that I see, that the people that are making the laws, that they often lack this thing that we discussed before, namely this basic technical understanding that they could hopefully in the future get from the school, for instance, in order to understand what is happening there. Because as you say, they think like it's as if we talk to each other here, then this is the same as when I talk to someone in California or in China over the internet. But no, it's not, because they are in a totally different setting, totally different time zone, cultural differences, everything different, and also totally different dynamics. And so this is something where I always hope that or where I'm very curious to what happens, like when the next generations of politicians maybe come to power there, and they have more background because they are more these so-called digital natives or more familiar with the technology and with the reality. Because I also think that these older politicians, it's not their reality. So they use the network for specific tasks, like sending an email. They would also send you a postcard if it would be the same speed, or like using a messenger, but it's just different than when you see people at school today that have then again this attention span that is maybe short, and that use short language, that even change the language now. And so it's interesting. But on the other hand, we are human beings somehow. We are somehow social, and I think that will be an interesting part, how the young generation is using it. From my point of view, they're using it to have more efficient support process, I would tell them, so that they negotiate when they meet. For sure, there's always a criticism. In former times, we made a fixed appointment. I think we are the last ones to know that. And we met at Oktoberfest, 7 o'clock at this tent. Everyone was there because else we were lost. But it's okay. Now you can say, okay, I'm 5 minutes late, or you can even track me when I'm coming. Why not? It's fair. Right. But they meet still. They have still fun meeting each other, and I think that's the important thing. And perhaps there we have to look. There are other cultures around in the world, and the other cultures adapt it differently. Perhaps they are only online. I don't know, but I think here in Germany right now, the young people are still using it just as a tool somehow. But I think it's very important that we focus how to help our politicians, the rule makers, and stuff like that. Not only to hear to the lobbyists, because there are lots of lobbyists around, and for sure you just said it with upload filters. The main issue from my point of view within this decision was the bad one, that the young people who were on the street, they say, okay, they don't copy me, they don't like me, I can go to the street, but it happens nothing, and they just do the opposite. And there were even the unfair commenters, something like everyone was bored and stuff like that. I was by accident with the demonstration in Munich, and there were 30 or 40,000 people on the street. Were not bored. My 11-year-old boy just calculated how much money would need to buy them all. It's crap. And I think that's a bad thing, where the politicians have to cope and
try to don't do the same mistakes like in the UK, because else you always say European Union only bad stuff, and it's not correct. We have lots of great stuff in the European Union, and we have really to try to convince everyone that it's a cool idea, great idea, and we have to even foster it and get an even bigger European Union.
And more powerful, maybe also.
Perhaps we have to talk the different issues, but it's something like, it's great that there we have the same currency, we can work everywhere, we don't need the passport and stuff like that. In former times, as we were young,
and we had to exchange money and so on. But this is again something where I think like people are just not used to it anymore, and so they are just used to the status quo. And I mean, what happened with the Brexit was more like this, which opens up another entire thing, like this filter bubble thing. Like, okay, the people get targeted information. So from an objective point of view, it was misinformation. I mean, the positive one would probably have been too. And so many people were probably influenced by that. Like this thing where they said like, okay, the UK is paying 300 million every day for health insurance in the rest of Europe or something like that. I think these were roughly the numbers. And so then they voted. So yeah, but I totally agree to you with like Europe is an important thing, and also I think having an open internet is something very important, because to me it's an important tool to create peace also, because you can talk to people in other places in the world, you can get information, and so to me the positive sides of the internet are much more important than the negative ones, because of course you also have lots of negative things like darknets where you can get weapons, or you have child pornography or other horrible things that are happening there. So it's like a reflection of the real world, but it's definitely making the world a smaller space. So like in the sense that the people are getting into contact to each other.
And you can keep contact. That's a great thing somehow.
There's also like a key issue of this digital transformation that also many people in the interviews said, like this being able to communicate with people. So like my brother in the US now, I can just FaceTime with him or hang out with him or Skype with him, and it's not like being physically present, but it's close. And you can have this telepresence for free. I mean, it's not free, but it's like you pay with other things. And it's almost like being at the same place at the same time.
Perhaps we could cope on this topic, that everything has to be free on the internet. And I think that's an interesting aspect, because if we would say now, okay, we could build up in the department secure, anonymous internet, and it costs €5 a month. Would you buy it or not? And who would buy it and stuff like that? And I think that would be an interesting discussion, but they are not around. And that's something like interesting, because you're used to get everything free there, and only, don't misunderstand me, but only Apple users are used to pay a little bit, but, it's quite interesting. And I think there we need fair discussion somehow around too, because in former times, if you bought a newspaper, it cost money. If you bought a magazine, it costs money, and why should it be free in the internet?
Yeah, that's right. And so there, an interesting point for me was when you go to Portugal and you buy a mobile phone plan, then there are plans that include certain internet services. So you get one plan that only has WhatsApp and blah blah blah, so a set of something. And this I consider again dangerous, because this is like, it's totally changing the business, because then you only use WhatsApp. You cannot use another messenger because it's not for free. And it's also interesting from the dimension of when you think we would create a startup right now, as long as the internet would have equal access, what it doesn't have. I mean, Google has their own network and so on, so the important players have already their own infrastructure. But in former times, when Google was created, for instance, then they had this advantage that everything was equal, and then you could just go there. Cool. So as time is progressing, let's maybe come to the last question. So our motto is being human with algorithms. So what does it mean for you to be a human with algorithms in today's world? So I know that it's like a broad sentence, and so it's interesting to ask it, because it's just, what does the person do with it?
Actually, there's biological computing too. There are great different approaches, and how you could use DNA, for example, to do binary calculations, stuff like that. So I would say there's everything. From my point of view, there are a bunch or great options around to use the technology, the algorithms. But it's always something like we have to do with some kind of care.
Mm-hmm.
We have to think about it. There's a new initiative here around which say for think then code.
Yeah.
It's a good point. It's a fair
Yes.
point. If you think to AI, for example, and
Yeah.
stuff like that, and you get more and more responsibility. But I would say there are lots of great possibilities to apply it. For example, if you look to medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And we're still coping with data protection laws and stuff
Mm-hmm.
like that, and we are not allowed to use data of patients
Mm-hmm.
to reuse it with other patients, stuff
Yeah.
like that. And I think there we need really fair discussions with it.
Yeah.
But from my point of view, if I look back the last 20 years, 30 years, it really made lots of my life easier,
Yeah.
and it brought lots of fun. Because I like techniques and I like, for example, to repair broken iPad screens and stuff like that. I got lots of my family, but it's something
Yeah.
like I do something with my hands
Yeah.
and I try to understand still the technology is working
Yeah.
there, and you don't need too much equipment to do stuff like
Yeah.
that. And so it's something like to be the little child who's playing around and try to understand the world somehow, and you can still do it,
Yeah.
and you can do it with software and algorithm even more. And so
Yeah.
I think there are great inventions around, and we should use it. And back to the point, perhaps I think university, we have to, be an instance somehow to help society
Yeah.
to fostering these issues and to bring wisdom back to the people,
Yeah.
and we can shape our future. And so it's great. We should do more MOOCs like you did,
Yeah.
and try to convince people all over the world to take it. And there are great stories around. I just learned a student who's doing now his master degree here at TUM, and he came from Africa,
Yeah.
and he first did a MOOC with TUM because the school he was there was on strike,
Yeah.
and then he applied here and got a position, and it's great. And something like that, there's
Yeah.
really a usage
Yeah,
out
that's
of the
really
information you are there,
Yeah.
and there you
Yeah.
can really help people to have a better life later on.
Yeah.
And so that's the cool thing about education, and we have it and we're shaping it, and so it's great.
Cool. So time was flying, so I could talk to you like for 3 more hours, I guess. I
Next
think we
time.
opened like lots of topics there. But yeah, so thank you very much.
Thanks,
And it was a pleasure. So I hope that the people will continue discussing a little bit in the comments. And thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.